Today we'll be reviewing some of my favorite breathing books. Obviously, breathing is a huge part of XPT. It's a huge part of what we talk about, what we teach. We've been very fortunate to connect with some of the world's best breathing experts, and we have certainly read probably every breathing book. I won't say every breathing book, but a lot of breathing books that are out there. So we'll compile some of the best ones and I'll tell you what I like them for. Let's start off with general use case. You don't know anything about breath work or you're just getting into it. One of my favorite books for that is Just Breathe by Dan Brule or Brule. I don't know how you say it. It's got an accent, so it could be Brule. Excellent book to really get started. It goes through a lot of different breathing protocols. So it tells you about these different methods like the Wim Hof method or Buteyko method, all the different yoga methods. It tells you about a lot of different ones, and it's a really surface level understanding of each method with a little bit of practical application. I'll give you an exercise to do at the end of the discussion on the different method and why it was created and what to use it for. So it's a really great one. This is usually one of the first ones I recommend to people if they don't know anything about breath work and they're just looking to create a little surface level understanding and get exposed to some different methods. Just Breathe by Dan Brule. Another great book for general use case. This one is really popular lately. This is called Breath by James Nestor. This is a really good book. It's a little more in depth than Just Breathe. James Nestor is a great writer. He's a journalist. He's not a breath expert, but he did a lot of research for this book, so there's a lot of really good stuff in here. This one's a little bit more based on the Buteyko method, a lot of stuff about nasal breathing and Buteyko, so it's not as well-rounded as something like Just Breathe. There's a lot of other breath work practices that aren't in here, but again, James Nestor is not a breath expert who spent 20 years doing this. He's a journalist who spent a couple of years doing some really good research, and he's a great journalist, so it makes it entertaining because some of the books that you read can be very mind-numbing. So this is a great book. I think the biggest limitation here is from the performance side of breathing. I know some of you out there want to know about breathing during different types of exercise and really just understanding performance training, and I wouldn't say James Nestor is knowledgeable from a performance coach standpoint, but still a great book and a great introduction to breath work. Another good one for the average consumer is this children's book, Breathe Like a Bear. So this is a great one to introduce your kids to proper breathing mechanics, proper breathing techniques. We know that the average age where we start to lose function of the diaphragm or kids start to see breathing dysfunctions is about 5.5 years old. It's good to introduce your kids to different breathing stuff, and obviously there's great illustrations and there's analogies that have to do with all these kind of cool things that connect with kids. I use this book and some of the analogies when I did my breathing for kids video or Instagram live that we did last year during quarantine. And then as we move from the general consumer, maybe you want to take a little deeper dive into breathing, you want to learn a little more of the science, or you've read some of those other books, Patrick McKeown's Oxygen Advantage is excellent. Patrick McKeown is one of our breathing advisors to XPT. He's been a big part of the program. He's been a big part of my education and knowledge as I dove deeper into breath work. This book is heavily about the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it's about the biochemical or the blood gases. So that's super important. There's a ton of benefits. It's obviously a lot about the Buteyko method because that's a lot of Patrick's background. It's a little dense from a science standpoint, depending on what your knowledge base is. It can be a little bit hard for the average lay person to understand, but it's not a science book, so it's not crazy difficult, but it may take a little bit of rereading to really understand some of it. But it's a great one, particularly about general health and just improving your overall health. Again, I'd say one of the limitations here is Patrick is a breathing expert. He's certainly not a performance expert. So when it comes to performance training, athletes, I don't think his knowledge is as in depth in some of those things, or at least not in the book. I won't say that about him personally because he's a super smart dude. But in the book, there's definitely some big limitations there for performance. Still a great book and a big foundational element that helped to shape a lot of our XPT courses. So a lot of foundations we came from that. Patrick also has another book, The Breathing Cure. This one is going to be much more in-depth. There's a lot of good info in here. A lot of the same stuff from the other book. There's a lot of carryover for sure. This one's probably a little bit more for coaches and practitioners. Not a book that I would recommend to the average person who just wants to learn more about breathing, because it is long and it is dense. But Patrick is world class, so always recommend his stuff. Now, I've mentioned performance a few times, so we'll talk about more of the performance-minded person or the coach. As we move into that end of the spectrum, one of the books that I highly recommend is Breathing for Warriors. Dr. Belisa Vranic is another world-class breathing expert. We were fortunate to get to link up with her back in XPT Miami a few years ago. She has a background in psychology. She understands performance. She's trained in jiu-jitsu and a bunch of martial arts and other sports. So she really understands the performance side of breathing and how to connect those things. And that's what she's done really well here in Breathing for Warriors. She also focuses a lot more on breathing mechanics. So I mentioned Patrick's focus was a lot on respiratory gases and the biochemical aspect of breathing, where Dr. Belisa doesn't focus nearly as much on that. She focuses way more on breathing mechanics, which is super important. I typically say that it's one of the first things that you should be learning and the first thing that I teach. She does a great job of talking about mechanics in this book, how you should breathe during different types of exercise, how you should breathe in different positions, respiratory muscle training, so a lot more on the performance end of the spectrum. So I highly recommend this book. And she also touches on things like breathing with a weight vest on or wearing all your kit. So great stuff for military, law enforcement, people who are in jobs that require a lot of that kind of stuff. So highly recommend that book. And then another one, she does a good job of covering this material. This is her first book. Sorry, I don't know if it's her first, but this was the first book of hers that I read. This one came out a long time ago. It's just called Breathe, the revolutionary 14-day program to improve your mental and physical health. This is another great book. This one's way less about performance. This one's much more about just breathing mechanics and how to breathe for general health, how to self-assess your breathing mechanics. Again, another excellent book. If you're a practitioner, a coach, a trainer, a doctor, and you want to learn about breathing, you probably have to read all of these, but this is a really good one to establish some foundations. For the general person or the recreational athlete, you can probably get everything you need from this book. Both are excellent books, and Dr. Belisa, anything she puts out is world class. The last one I'm going to talk about here is The Anatomy of Breathing. This one I would only recommend for coach, doctor, practitioner, but it is a phenomenal reference book. This goes through all of the anatomy, all the muscles, the bones that make up our entire respiratory system. You can see a ton of illustrations and things, so it's not a dense read. It's a really good reference book, and obviously I've got mine highlighted like crazy. I always go back to this as I learn new things about breathing and look at how those things impact the different anatomy and physiology of our body. So this is a great reference book, The Anatomy of Breathing. Again, not recommended for a general consumer, but coaches, doctors, practitioners, any of our XPT coaches or performance breathing coaches, in the course, I recommend this book as well as a few of those other ones. So those are some of the best breathing books that I have found out there. Our job at XPT is to read all of this information, talk to all these experts, and try to compile all of the information into simple, actionable things that you guys can take away. And that's what we've put into our performance breathing course. Go pick up some of those books and expand your knowledge around breath work. And make sure you leave a comment below. Let us know what you think of these different books. If you've read any of these, let us know what you think. Or if there's any that I missed that you think should have been reviewed or are in your top 3 choices of best breathing books out there, definitely tag those below and let us know. And then we will see you guys next time for the next XPT product review.